Erica Pena was in a line of work that made her stay away from the authorities on any normal day, but this was not a normal day. If you hadn't guessed, Erica was a sex worker and she had just escaped a customer who had pulled a gun on her. As she attempted to flee, the man grabbed her shirt, but she pulled herself out of it and continued to run in just her bra. When she made it to a gas station nearby, she saw a Texas state trooper fueling his vehicle and, ignoring her instinct to avoid him, she ran toward the pump crying out for help. As soon as she told the trooper what had happened, he immediately knew that she was a very important witness. Over the past 2 weeks, 2 other sex workers in the area had been murdered, and the Texas authorities were desperate to track down the culprit. Unfortunately, Erica's escape would not stop the killer immediately. It would set him off on a spree that would see him murder 2 more women in that same day before he was finally caught. This is Monsters. Laredo, Texas is on the border of the United States and Mexico. It has one of the U.S.'s many official border crossing gates, and being on the border, one of the prominent law enforcement agencies in the area is the U.S. Border Patrol. Unlike Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, who handles enforcing immigration law within the U.S., Border Patrol handles the security directly at the border and the ports of entry. If someone is actively entering the U.S. illegally, Border Patrol will take action to capture them. After someone makes it into the country illegally or their immigration status changes to no longer be valid, then ICE is the one who would enforce that. At least that's the textbook explanation of the difference between Border Patrol and ICE. Even further south down the U.S.-Mexico border is a small city called Brownsville, and like Laredo, it has an official border crossing point where you can cross into Matamoros in Mexico. That was where Ramon Ortiz was from when he had a child with a woman who lived in Brownsville named Guadalupe Rocha, who went by Lupita. Juan David Ortiz, who went by David, was born on May 22, 1983 in Brownsville, and his father didn't remain in the picture. When David was a teenager, Lupita told him that his father committed suicide not long after he was born, but there's really no way to verify that. Either way, Lupita raised David as a single mother and would eventually give him 3 half-sisters. Crystal was born around 1988, and twins Stephanie and Samantha were born in 1998 when Juan was 15 years old. Growing up, the family was religious, being involved with a Pentecostal church where parishioners regularly jumped from the pews, shaking and speaking in tongues. In high school, he joined the Youth Alive Bible study group where he eventually became a leader. He was described as outgoing and not afraid to spread the word of God. He also joined the JROTC program, which is the Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps. It's a program held at high schools in the U.S. for youth who are interested in joining the military after high school. The non-junior version of the program is for college students, and it helps both get a head start on becoming an officer in the U.S. military. David had a plan that he was going to graduate from high school, join the U.S. Navy, go to college, and become a pastor. His outgoing and straight-laced appearance was a complete contrast to his home life. His mother, Lupita, regularly brought home men who were not of a higher caliber personality. Many of them would physically assault her, and David had to call 911 on multiple occasions. Despite his struggles at home, after graduating in 2001, he started his plan by joining the Navy. He trained to be an emergency medical technician. After training, he was stationed at the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center in 29 Palms, California, which is generally just called 29 Palms. That would become the main military base where the Marine Corps would train to ultimately be deployed to Iraq in 2003 and then Afghanistan in the years that followed. David was in the Navy, but the Marine Corps is a division of the U.S. Department of the Navy, and they generally work together. While stationed there, he worked as a medical technician taking care of minor wounds sustained during training exercises. He would hang out with the other people stationed there, and he was generally considered someone who fit into military life well. At the beginning of 2003, David and his unit were deployed to Iraq, where he traveled with a convoy of Marines, keeping track of their physical and mental health. While there, he didn't seem to be involved in any major combat directly, but he still had some pretty horrific experiences as a medic while in Baghdad. After 3 months in the Iraqi capital, his unit moved to a smaller city for a month before being shipped back to the U.S. Though they were flown to the Middle East, it was a 2-month ride on a Navy ship that took them back to Southern California. In August, David went back to Brownsville on leave to visit his family. It was while there that he ran into a friend from high school named Daniela Guajardo, and the two began dating. A year later they married, and David decided to leave the military and return to Texas. He was stationed at Fort Sam Houston, just outside of San Antonio, which is actually a base for the U.S. Army, but they have a Navy medical training center there, and David spent the rest of his time in the service at that training center. He and Daniela moved into a house in a residential suburb on the west side of San Antonio, and David began attending the American Military University. He earned a bachelor's degree in criminal justice there and eventually got a master's degree in international relations from St. Mary's University. In May of 2009, Juan David Ortiz was discharged from the U.S. Navy, having had a successful and decorated career. With that, he was easily accepted into the San Antonio Police Academy, but before entering, he was offered a job with the U.S. Border Patrol. He told people that he chose that option because, outside of the better pay, as the son of immigrants, he wanted to help people who were looking for a better life in the U.S. When David began his career with the Border Patrol, he was issued the standard service weapon for that agency, which is a .40 caliber Heckler & Koch P2000. He was stationed in Cotulla, which isn't actually right on the U.S.-Mexico border. It's between San Antonio and Laredo, about 60 miles or 96 kilometers from the border. It was about an hour commute from his home at the Adams Hill suburb of San Antonio, where he lived. That station operates as a backup to the Laredo station, which is right on the front lines of border activity. In Cotulla, they patrol the area and check trains to try and catch anyone who slipped through the patrols closer to the border. He wasn't all about stopping people from coming into the country for David, though. Outside of the drug smugglers and human traffickers, there were many people who were just looking to find a safer place to live than where they had previously been. The people responsible for helping with illegal border crossings, known as coyotes, were most often just looking to take advantage of those people's desperation. They would get the immigrants into the U.S., leave them in the vast Texas desert with inadequate supplies, and many times those people would die. Sometimes David would discover someone or a group of people clinging to life, and he was able to put his military training into use by offering medical treatment. He was happy to be doing double duty, serving his country while helping the less fortunate, at least for a while. He eventually became disillusioned by the never-ending string of death that was being caused by the border. Whether it was families being dropped in the desert to die or drug runners getting into gunfights with law enforcement, the job started having a negative effect on David. In 2017, David was assigned to the Targeted Enforcement Unit, which was specifically tasked with breaking up smuggling rings. That unit operated out of Laredo, so he and his wife bought a house in northern Laredo, and Daniela started working as a registered nurse at a local trauma center. Things seemed okay for a while, but in January of 2018, David was promoted to a supervisory agent for the unit, and the additional stress that came with the position caused him to slip further into a state of depression. He said he began getting migraines and would have frequent nightmares about the things he had witnessed in both Iraq and on the border. He became irritable and quick to anger, which caused Daniela to spend more and more time away from home. She would take their 2 kids and go stay with family in either Brownsville or back in San Antonio. With more time home alone, he became paranoid and told others he thought people were talking about him or even plotting to harm him. One of the most notable changes in David's personality was his extreme shift in immigration beliefs. Being the child of immigrants, he joined the Border Patrol to offer help to people he felt he related to. But by 2018, he told friends that he hoped the president closed the border and said, quote, "I hope he deports everyone." Those statements concerned a friend from the military, and he suggested that David go to the Veterans Administration and try to seek help. There, he was diagnosed with PTSD and prescribed a number of medications. Something for depression, something for migraines, something for irritability, and something to help him sleep. He also had appointments with a therapist once a week for 12 weeks. Daniela would later say that there was a noticeable improvement in her husband's mood after he started taking medication, and his coworkers backed that up by saying he seemed less jittery. That change wouldn't last long, though, as after a few months, people started to notice that David's mood got dark again. Though people from his past reported that he had been as straight-laced as they come, never drinking, he would later confess to multiple co-workers that he was drinking all the time to calm his anxiety, before and after his shifts. By the summer of 2018, David's behavior was noticeably unhinged, and Daniela began keeping herself and the kids away from him again. Despite everyone around him who saw his behavior getting darker and darker, nobody reported that behavior to his supervisors. What most people didn't know about David was that, at least from the beginning of 2018, he had been developing relationships with a number of sex workers in the Laredo area. Not in a work capacity either. Sometimes law enforcement will develop working relationships with sex workers and drug dealers as a means of getting information about worse criminals, but that wasn't David's goal. He had a sexual relationship with them that would turn into even more for some. He had a few women who he would give money to without receiving any services. One of them he started to become obsessed with. Melissa Ramirez was born on April 6, 1989 in Laredo. The third of 4 children, she became overly protective of her younger brother. When she found out that some other boys in her neighborhood had bullied him, she confronted them with a hammer and they left him alone. She was interested in music and ended up learning to play the accordion. Despite her father not being in the picture for most of her youth, she was said to have had a pretty happy childhood, but that all changed when she was 12 years old. She went to a friend's house for a sleepover, and during the night she was sexually assaulted by the friend's 30-year-old brother. She only told a couple people about the assault, but everyone around her noticed that she was immediately different. She was getting into trouble at school and staying out late, sometimes for days. That turned into drug use and self-harm. After she inevitably dropped out of high school, she got deeper into drug addiction and started performing sex work for income. She began racking up a criminal record, many for soliciting and drug possession. By 2018, Melissa was 29 years old and she had 5 children with 3 different men, but none of them were in her custody. 2 of them were in the custody of her mother, Cristina Benavides, and the other 3 were in state custody. All of Melissa's family encouraged her to stay with them and get clean, but she wasn't ready. She remained on the streets and grew close to 3 other sex workers, 42-year-old Claudine Luera, 28-year-old Janelle Ortiz, and 35-year-old Griselda Alicia Cantu, who went by Shelley. They spent most of their nights at a local motel called the Relax Inn. In the early 2000s, the motel was a popular place for sex workers and drug dealers to use as a base of operations, but when new management took over in 2015, they cracked down on illegal activity. Despite it putting a dent in their business, they increased the rates and had police increase their sweeps of the area. They successfully shifted their main source of clientele from criminals to day laborers and truck drivers. They made an exception for 4 sex workers, though: Melissa, Claudine, Janelle, and Shelley. The managers said that they were quiet and respectful, always paying on time and keeping the place clean, so they let them continue renting rooms. By the end of August of 2018, Melissa was broke and didn't have shoes, let alone money to pay for a room, so when an acquaintance a few blocks down at the Pan American Motel offered to let her crash with her, Melissa jumped at the chance. Having a place to rest and clean up, Melissa's situation improved further when she told her friends she had met an older man who claimed he was going to take care of her. After 2 weeks living in the Pan American with another sex worker named Emily, she had worn out her welcome and was asked to leave. It was at about 2 a.m. on September 3, 2018 that a familiar face in a white Dodge Ram pickup pulled over and she hopped in the cab. In the driver's seat was David Ortiz, the older man who had promised to take care of her. He took her to a gas station for food and then stopped by a known drug dealer to score her some crack. When she exited the drug house, she was holding a bag of peanut M&Ms, and I haven't been able to confirm whether they were just candy or if that's what the drug dealers packaged the drugs in. Either way, when she got back into the truck, she immediately passed out. David tried to wake her up, but when she wouldn't come to, he panicked. He drove away and found a remote area, possibly initially thinking he could just dump the body, but as he pulled onto Jeffries Road, Melissa woke up and started asking where they were. David pulled over and Melissa got out, walked off the side of the road and began urinating. For some reason that David has never been able to explain, he pulled out his service-issued .40 caliber handgun, walked up behind her and fired 3 times. She was hit in the jaw, the neck, and the right wrist. Melissa collapsed into the dirt, blood already pooling around her, still clutching the bag of M&Ms. David fled the scene and then returned home where he cleaned up and then searched Homicide Laredo, Texas on his phone, but no recent news came up, so he went to sleep. It was about noon that same day when someone was driving down Jeffries Road near the intersection of Highway 255 and spotted something off the side of the road. They could tell it was a woman and she wasn't moving, so they called the police. Once on the scene, investigators searched the area and found the woman deceased from multiple gunshot wounds, and they found .40 caliber shell casings around her. Then they spoke with the man who had reported the discovery as well as the owner of the property, John Chamberlain. He hadn't heard any shots as his property was too big, but he had seen a suspicious vehicle in the area not long before the police had arrived. After being notified of the body on his property, John came out to block off the area and he noticed a black Dodge Ram pickup approach the roadblock, then turn around, sit in place for a few minutes, then drive away. Thinking it was odd, someone jumped in their car and followed the truck long enough to take a picture of their license plate. When investigators ran the plate, it came back to a man named Rene Ark. Rene was a Laredo police officer who was off that day looking for property to purchase with the intention of building a new home for his family. When he got to the roadblock, he turned around, stopped for a few minutes so his son and stepdaughter could look at the horses in the neighboring field, and then he headed home. After returning home, Rene got a call from a fellow officer to let him know his vehicle had come up in a homicide investigation. Rene immediately called the police station to talk to the watch commander about the situation and was told to just wait. It was only a few minutes later that Rene's stepdaughter got a call from a neighbor saying their house was surrounded by law enforcement. Rene and his wife were arrested and taken to the station for questioning. There, Rene explained what he had done that day and let them check his phone for any signs that he might be having an affair with the woman who was murdered. When asked why he didn't call in about the body, he said he never got close enough to see a body. The road was blocked, so he turned around. Rene had a clean record and no signs of having an affair, so the investigators eventually realized they had the wrong person, but not until after 5 hours of questioning and the local news printing details of him being a suspect. After breaking the news of Melissa's death to her mother, Christina, investigators learned that on September 1st, she had shown up at her mother's home with a man named David Garza. David drove a black Chevy pickup, and Christina described his behavior while there as awkward. When investigators tracked him down, they went to his house and questioned him. He explained that he had been with Melissa on the 1st. They went to her mother's house, then ended up back at his house where Melissa did drugs and passed out. The following morning, he dropped her off on the streets near the motel she frequented and hadn't seen her since. They did become more interested when he said he owned a .40 caliber pistol which matched the casings found at the scene, but it hadn't been fired recently, and it turned out that he had a pretty solid alibi. After dropping Melissa off, he went to Houston for work and was there until after the murder. After his alibi was confirmed, the investigators were back to square one. While Renee Ark was proclaiming his innocence in the police station, David had got up and went to work for an afternoon shift. When he arrived, the office was buzzing with activity from the recently discovered murder, and it was the Border Patrol who was conducting a search of Renee's license plate in a specific system they had to track license plate activity all over the country. It was actually David who was the only person in the field office that had access to that system. The only thing David could do to help himself was to try not to disprove Renee's involvement, so he denied the request to run the plate, but was eventually forced to. He returned the results showing no suspicious activity and hoped Renee remained a suspect. Though Renee was released and determined to have not committed the murder, along with David Garza, suspicion didn't fall on David and he began to relax. He fell back into his regular work routine, at least for the next 10 days. Claudine Luera was born on December 3, 1975 in Laredo. She was the third of 4 daughters born to Ramon and Ann Luera. Unlike most in the area, Claudine's heritage was not entirely Hispanic. Her father was in the U.S. Air Force and met her mother, who had been born in Scotland, while he was stationed in the U.K. They married and she returned to the U.S. with him. Claudine was a good student in elementary and middle school, but she also had a traumatic experience that would go on to shape her life when she got older. For Claudine, she was only 6 years old when an older relative sexually assaulted her, and to make matters worse, when she told her mother and grandmother, they didn't believe her. With her view of healthy relationships skewed, Claudine began dating a man named Hector Zambrano Jr., who went by Junior. He worked for one of the cartels across the border, and eventually Claudine dropped out of school and they moved to Nuevo Laredo in Mexico, where she started shooting heroin. At one point, Claudine and Junior returned to the States to visit her mother, and Junior was arrested on a kidnapping charge. It turned out that Claudine's mother, Anne, had informed the authorities that Junior would be there because she couldn't think of any other way to save her daughter from the situation she was in. Junior was sent to prison and Claudine went to rehab, getting herself clean, getting a GED, and then a full-time clerical job. Though her life had improved, the men in her life had not. She ended up having children with 3 different men, a daughter, and then 2 sets of twins. The stress was manageable with the help of her mother, but in 2008, Anne became critically ill and died of heart failure and kidney failure. That thrusted Claudine into a severe depression, and she eased the pain with booze. Friends finally got her to go to the doctor, who prescribed her Xanax. Then, to add more fuel to the fire, Junior was paroled and he moved in with Claudine. At first it helped. Junior encouraged her to get off the booze and pills, and with him helping with the kids, she was able to. Soon enough, though, Junior was dealing drugs and Claudine was back on heroin. Their home became the scene of regular nightly parties, and Claudine's oldest daughter moved out to live with an aunt when she was only 12 years old. In 2014, Junior was arrested again and sent back to prison, and without any other support system, Claudine was kicked out of her house and moved into the Pan American Motel with her 4 remaining children. Of course, that was not a good setting for children, and soon the state took them away and placed them into the custody of family members. 2 of Claudine's children were disabled, so the loss of them also came with a loss of Social Security payments and increased food stamps. Desperate for income, Claudine began working the streets, offering her body in exchange for money. She was able to make enough to keep a motel room and pay for her heroin use. She had been arrested 5 times over the years for soliciting or drug possession, but went right back to the lifestyle as soon as she was released. Over the course of 2018, Claudine had tried to get clean multiple times. She had been admitted to a 3-month program at a rehab center in Corpus Christi, but left after 3 days. She tried to use methadone to wean herself off of heroin, but never made it off the drug, possibly because she couldn't afford the methadone. In September, she told friends that she met a man who would get her the money to buy enough methadone to help get her clean. On September 12th, she got out onto the streets earlier than usual and began flagging down customers. At a little after midnight, David pulled up in his white truck and she hopped in the passenger seat. He first took her to a dealer's house so she could score, and then they began driving to a secluded area when Claudine brought up Melissa's murder. Since he was in law enforcement, he knew where the murder had happened, and she said she wanted to see the spot. David agreed, and as they drove to the area, Claudine suddenly came to the realization that David was the one who murdered Melissa. She started yelling at him that he was probably the killer, so he pulled over and ordered her to get out of his truck. She grabbed her belongings and stormed out of the vehicle, stomping into a field on the side of the road. David got out, walked up behind her, and fired 2 shots at the back of her head. The first shot missed, but the second one hit and she fell to the ground. David got back in his truck and drove away. He would later describe that after the first murder, he was shaking as he drove away, but this time he was calm as could be. He was on his way to becoming a completely unfeeling serial killer. Claudine was not dead when she was discovered a few hours later by a passing truck driver. He noticed what looked like a body in the grass and pulled over. As he walked up to her, he could tell she was still breathing, so he alerted the authorities and tried to give her a towel and a bottle of water, but she pushed him away. When state troopers arrived at the scene, they found Claudine laying in the grass off the side of the road with her belongings strewn about around her. She had an injury to the back of her head, but it was initially believed that she was hit by a car. When the trooper was checking her for other wounds, Claudine started trying to fight him off, and it's believed that was an unconscious attempt to fight off David. When they got her to the hospital, the doctors rushed to save her, but she ended up dying from her wound. After an X-ray, it was determined that she had been shot in the back of the head and the bullet was still lodged in her left temporal lobe. At the same time, investigators were searching the scene where they found signs that the victim was a sex worker, and they also found 2 .40 caliber shell casings. That was when the local authorities realized that they were likely dealing with the beginnings of a serial killer. Unfortunately, besides the matching shell casings, there was nothing at the new scene that would provide any more information as to who the killer was. Sex workers in the area knew that 2 of their companions had been murdered, and some of them were able to stay off the streets for a few days. But drug addiction pulled at them harder than their fear of being murdered, and many of them spent at least some time looking for customers. At least enough to keep themselves in enough drugs to stave off withdrawals. One of those women was Erica Pena. 28-year-old Erica Pena was a Laredo native who had been pulled to the streets by drug addiction like so many others. In early 2018, David picked her up and paid her for sex the first time, but he developed an obsession with her and became a repeat customer. He started giving her money without sex, funding her lifestyle just because he wanted to be with her. He would supply her with drugs and motel rooms just to take care of her. David would ask her to tell him she loved him, but she refused. She later told a friend that she wanted to be with him, but that he was married, so she resisted. One of Erica's friends drove her out to his house on multiple occasions, and while the standard routine would be for him to wait in the car while she interacted with her customer, eventually David invited him in to hang out. That friend said that he never witnessed David take drugs, but that he could tell he was definitely on something. That would be the mix of psychopharmacological drugs and alcohol that David was regularly abusing. David and his wife Daniela were supposed to go to San Antonio to visit family and then attend a watch party for a big heavyweight boxing event on September 15th. Just before they were scheduled to leave to stay with Daniela's sister on the 14th, there was a water leak at their house. So David told his wife to take the kids and go. He would wait for the plumber and then drive up the next day. It's possible that the water leak was a lie in order to have the evening away from his family, but that's speculation. His inner darkness had grown after his second kill, and with his family away, he hopped in his truck and went out to find a victim. At about 6 p.m., David found Erica hiding from the rain under a bus stop cover, and she got into his truck. Like their usual routine, they first stopped at a drug house to get Erica a fix. Then they drove to a gas station where Erica got out and purchased a Bud Light Tall Boy, a blue Gatorade, and a pack of cigarettes. With supplies in hand, David and Erica went to his house where she shot up at his dining room table. While she was getting high, they talked and she sensed something was off with her customer. Soon he began talking about being worried about having received oral sex from Melissa shortly before her murder. He said he was worried they would find his DNA on her, but she told him he shouldn't worry if he hadn't done anything to her. Erica described the sudden realization that he was likely worried because he had actually murdered Melissa along with Claudine. When he suggested they go to the bedroom, she stalled and said she wanted to go outside for a cigarette. As her fear increased, she told David that she needed to get something out of his truck, but before she got there, she vomited on the sidewalk in front of his house. She suggested it was because she hadn't eaten all day, so they got into his vehicle and David drove them to get some burgers from a nearby Circle K gas station. During the drive, Erica asked David to just take her back to town, but he wouldn't. He drove into the parking lot of the Circle K and parked so he was hidden between two trailers. Then he pulled out his .40 caliber service weapon and pointed it right at her chest. In a survival situation, most people have one of three immediate reactions: fight, flight, or freeze. Erica immediately chose to flee. She got the door open and tried to jump out of the truck, but David grabbed her shirt. Not letting that stop her, she slipped out of the shirt and ran away in just her bra and white jeans. She screamed for help as she ran around the building and straight toward the state trooper at pump number 4.
We were talking about de las muchachas que acaba de fallecer, and he got very nervous. And he started acting weird, and my stomach started to hurt. Literally, I vomit. Y le digo yo, "Are you okay?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm okay." And then all of a sudden he's like,
Así que just ponte aquí nomás, just nomás quédate así.
y luego all of a sudden me dice, I feel weird, dice, I feel very stressed.
Pero te asaltó él cuando te quitó la camisa.
Cuando me quitó la camisa, yo me zafé de la camisa para salirme.
So he was trying to grab you?
He was trying to grab me y subirme para subirme me sacó, dijo, wait.
At that point, Erica was safe from David, but she was still high and still had an instinct to not trust law enforcement, so her story was a little fractured. At first, she made it seem like she didn't know her attacker, but eventually she told the trooper that his name was David and that she knew where he lived. Still, she told him that David was an oil field worker, despite knowing that he was a Border Patrol agent. It was when Erica told the trooper that she had talked to David about the recent murders when he started acting strange that the trooper realized that David was their serial killer. Having a victim escape is the cause of many murderers being caught. Unfortunately, in this case, it wasn't soon enough. Erica's escape pushed David into a frenzy and he went on a killing spree. Once Erica was out of sight, David sped out of the parking lot and returned to his house, which was only 5 minutes away. He was home before Erica had even gotten the whole story out, but he knew it was only a matter of time before the authorities would be there. After chugging another tall boy, David went around his house and gathered weapons. He loaded his AR-15, his H&K .40 caliber handgun, and a 9mm Beretta, laying them all out on the kitchen counter. He had a shelf full of ammunition that he had amassed over the years, and he grabbed a few boxes to put on the counter with his weapons. He had a Remington 12-gauge shotgun in the home as well, but he couldn't remember where he put it, which is so responsible in a house with children. David believed that the authorities were about to storm his house and he was prepared to put up a fight. With his arsenal at the ready, he sat down with his beer and waited for the battle to begin. But it didn't. He sat there in increasing anticipation for a storm of Kevlar-clad officers to surround his house, but after waiting for over an hour, they didn't show up. Law enforcement bureaucracy would only help David by making the trooper at the Circle K required to report the assault to the Laredo Police Department first and have them send out an officer to take Erica's statement. Well, he waited for that officer to arrive for about 15 minutes before he sent a text message to Texas Ranger E.J. Salinas, who was the special investigator assigned to the double murder case. He told the trooper to bring Erica to the Webb County Sheriff's substation where she was made to tell the entire story again. Salinas found a map and got her to point out the road that David lived on, and it wasn't until then that they came up with a plan to take Erica into the neighborhood so she could point to the right house. Even then, they weren't planning to knock on his door at that point. They wanted to confirm the address and then make a plan to take him into custody, which is great to plan out a safe way to make that happen, but all it really did was give David time to commit more murders. By the time they drove by David's house at 11:15 p.m., he was already gone. David began thinking that maybe Erica hadn't ratted him out. In his delusional and drug-fueled state, he started believing it was a sign. It was a sign that he needed to continue cleaning the shameful people out of the city. He would later say that he wanted to get the shit out of Laredo. It's always interesting to me when there are serial killers who get this self-righteous idea that they need to cleanse society of sex workers and drug addicts. How about you rid the world of the people who caused them to get that way? A very high percentage of sex workers and drug addicts are the victims of trauma, usually when they were children. How about you get self-righteous and cleanse the world of the child abusers and child rapists? You want there to be less sex workers and drug addicts in the world? Get rid of those assholes. It's hard for me to take a society seriously that looks down on people because they're sex workers or drug addicts while, at the same time, putting child rapists into positions of power. Hollywood, the church, the government, on all sides of the political spectrum. Before you grab your pitchfork and condemn someone who's just trying to ease the pain from the childhood trauma they suffered at the hands of an adult, make sure you're not celebrating the very asshole that caused the trauma in the first place. David decided that he was on a mission to clean up Laredo, but apparently not from the people who actually caused the problems in society. So, believing he was in the clear, at about 10:30 p.m. he had left his house and headed to the city to find another victim. Griselda Alicia Cantu, who went by Shelley, was born in 1984, and only a year later her mother was shot and killed. She had an older brother, and with her father in prison in Mexico, they were raised by their grandmother. Their father was released from prison when Shelley was a little girl, and he attended birthdays and ballet recitals, but he remained relatively distracted by his new wife and family. Shelley and her brother Joey grew up close, but in 1996 he learned that a friend's mother was being physically abused by her boyfriend, so he and some other boys lured the man to a backyard where they beat him to death. Some might say they were cleansing society. At 15 years old, Joey was charged as an adult and sentenced to 40 years in prison. Not long after Joey was sent away, Shelley, 12 years old at the time, was at a friend's house when she was drugged and sexually assaulted by an adult. Of course. Shelley told some people that her grandmother didn't believe her when she reported the assault. She told others that her grandfather shot and killed the man. The actual outcome is unknown, but she eventually got into drugs and her life spiraled out of control. At 15, she had the first of 4 children, all of whom would be taken by the state and put up for adoption. She wasn't even out of her teens when she hit the streets of Laredo and remained a fixture among sex workers for the next 20 years. In June of 2018, Joey was released on parole and was excited to reconnect with his sister, but by then, Shelley was in bad shape. She had used heroin for so long that her veins had collapsed and she was injecting under her skin, which is called skin popping. As if injecting heroin isn't bad enough, skin popping is even more dangerous as it causes abscesses that can become infected and lead to worse skin conditions. Shelley had been injecting heroin under the skin of her legs for so long by then that almost her entire legs were covered with lesions. Many were infected, and it's believed that some had turned into necrotizing fasciitis, also known as the flesh-eating disease. She eventually got kicked out of the Relax-In for not being able to pay, then she stayed with a friend for a while, but she got kicked out of there as well. Joey tried over and over to get her to come meet him so he could help her, but she never showed up. On September 14th, she was back out on the street trying to make enough to score another hit. At just before midnight, David pulled up in his truck and told her to get in. David hadn't known Shelley like he had his other victims. The condition of Shelley's legs turned off many potential customers, but David was not interested in sex. He drove to the outskirts of town but eventually took a wrong turn and wasn't sure where he was. Running out of patience, he pulled his truck onto the shoulder under an overpass and told Shelley to get out. They both exited the vehicle, and he claimed that this happened.
I literally parked under the bridge, under the interstate. I said, walk that way, to the left, listen to me. Walk that way, the other way, you're going to go to the left. said, why are you just letting me go? And I said, oh God, I want you to relay a message. And she's like, what? You heard about all the shit that's been on the news lately. And he said, I'm the one that did it, but I'm just going to let you go. You go, and I'm going to take care of myself tonight. And she's like, what do you mean? Like, I'm going to take care of myself tonight. I had planned on going to a Walmart this day on 35 on something. And there we go. Checking out, obviously. So, she listened to me. I told her to walk away. She was like, why? God loves you. God will forgive you. And God loves you, okay? I'm like, look, please, just go away, okay? I'm telling you to walk away. Just walk away, okay? Walk away. She walks away, and then she comes back. I'm telling you to walk away. You're not listening to me.
David told the investigators that he tried to let her go, but here's why that story is likely bullshit. The medical examiner said she was shot twice in the neck, but neither bullet wound was what caused her death. She had multiple areas of blunt force trauma to her head, one of which was so severe it caused a brain bleed, and that's what ultimately killed her. She had a fractured skull, a gash on top of her head, and another one on her forehead. The medical examiner determined that none of that would have been caused by the gunshots. So it seems more likely that David beat and shot Shelley, and not that he was going to release her, but she wouldn't go. Then David climbed back in his truck and sped off, looking for yet another victim. Janelle Ortiz was born Humberto Ortiz on April 25, 1990, but she was not related to David. That area is full of people with the last name Ortiz, Ramirez, and Peña. She was the second of 5 children and would encourage her younger siblings to stay in school and not do drugs. Unfortunately, their home life was less than stable, with their father not able to hold a job due to his alcoholism. Their mother worked 2 jobs to try to make ends meet, but it was a struggle. In school, Janelle's gender and sexual attraction were questioned, causing quite a bit of bullying. That area was not open to her feelings of being a girl, so she kept it hidden. As a teen, the suppression of her identity led her down a path of drug use and self-harm. At 15 years old, she hadn't transitioned by then, but she told her parents she was gay, which caused a fight and pushed Janelle away from her family. Soon after, she finally transitioned for her social life. She would continue dressing in boys' clothes for school, but once she left, she was the woman she always knew she was. The drugs had already taken a hold of her, and she was spending more time in the seedier areas of town instead of school. She ended up dropping out of school when she was 17. Shortly after that, Janelle's mother left to visit family in Indiana and never came back. With her younger sister only 13 at the time, Janelle became a mother figure to the girl. It only took a few years for the household to fall apart. Janelle's younger sister and brother went to live with relatives, her father moved in with his girlfriend, and the rest of them were homeless. Janelle eventually met Melissa, Claudine, and Shelley and began living and working out of the Relax Inn. On the evening of September 14th, despite 2 of her good friends having already been murdered, she was getting ready to go out and try to find a customer. She wasn't aware that a 3rd member of her friend group was already dead. She was out on the street at about 2 a.m. on the 15th when David pulled up in his truck. She was familiar with David as he'd bought her food a few times. She told David she was hungry and he offered to take her to a drive-thru. She hopped in the pickup and they drove off, but after passing a number of restaurants, she asked where they were going. David told her he was just driving, and according to David, she immediately said, quote, "It's you, isn't it?" He tried to convince her that he wasn't the murderer, but she didn't seem to believe him. He quickly drove out to a secluded area, pulled out his gun, and ordered her out of the truck. According to David, she said, quote, Do what you've got to do. That's when he walked up behind her and shot her once in the back of the head. The medical examiner would later state that the shot likely killed her immediately. David would later say that he was thinking about killing himself, but he believed he needed to, quote, continue ridding the world of streetwalkers. He was yet another loser murderer who claimed over and over again that he wanted to kill himself but never did. He just killed other people. And let's take a poll. Which would you rather have as a next-door neighbor? A sex worker or a murderer? I'm posting this as a poll online, but I have a feeling I know what the answer will be. David was keeping himself pumped up on a steady string of Bud Light tall boys, and before he hit the area where the sex workers frequented, he pulled into a gas station to take a leak and refill his supply. As he walked into the store, a trooper pulled in behind him and recognized the truck from the bolo that had been put out. The trooper pulled up to a gas pump to make it look like he was just refueling and called for backup. As that trooper exited his SUV with his AR-15 and took a position behind the vehicle, another trooper pulled into the gas station. When David walked out of the store, the troopers ordered him to put his hands up. As they moved in, barking commands to get onto his knees, David pretended he was confused. As they got closer, though, David took off running. The troopers ran after him and both tried to get him with their tasers but missed. David ended up running into a parking garage and hiding in the bed of a truck. He told investigators of the many times he was going to shoot it out with anyone who tried to arrest him, or that he was going to take himself out, but in the end, he ran. After days of killing people who were smaller and weaker than he was, he didn't have the balls to fight the troopers. While the surrounding area was blocked off and more law enforcement arrived to search for David, a call came in that another body had been found. Shelley's body was spotted by a motorist, and when a deputy arrived on the scene, he was sure it was another one of David's victims. The .40 caliber shell casings confirmed that pretty quickly. Eventually, a SWAT team moved into the parking garage and began a search for their suspect. As the officers made their way up to the 4th floor, David pulled out his phone and made a Facebook post that read, quote, "Doc Ortiz checks out. Farewell." Then he posted one more that read, quote, "To my wife and kids, I love you." Then he sent a text message to Daniela instructing her not to return to Laredo and telling her that he loved her and the kids. She texted him back with questions, obviously, but he wouldn't respond. Then he called her, and when she answered, he whispered into the phone, quote, "Please don't come back to Laredo. They're going to the house," and hung up. While being interrogated, David would also claim that he was planning to jump up and point his cell phone at the SWAT team as they approached the truck in hopes they would think he was armed and kill him. But he didn't do that either. When the SWAT team got to the truck, they could see him lying in the bed, and one of them opened the tailgate and pulled him out. He was patted down, cuffed, and taken into custody. Inside his truck was the H&K .40 caliber pistol, missing a number of rounds plus 2 more fully loaded magazines. Investigators also found Erica's Coach handbag and her belongings in it, as well as the receipt from when she purchased Bud Light, Gatorade, and cigarettes. David's interrogation was a masterclass in how to make things even harder on yourself after you get arrested for multiple murders. He refused to tell them his name. He refused to initial the document that said he understood his rights. Then, despite the evidence in his vehicle and the witness who had escaped his attack, he pretended like he had no memory of ever being in contact with anyone who he had murdered or attempted to murder. He also did stuff like this.
Because after he offered her something to eat, he started getting excited. She said he reached behind the truck, back seat. You pulled out your service weapon and pointed it at her face. She described it to taking her. She described what you were wearing, down to the T.
I've never put my weapon in my backseat.
Okay, well, she said you reached back. Right. Got your service weapon, pointed it at her.
This is something that's not uncommon when a guilty person is being interrogated. The investigator will give them a detail about how they committed the crime, and the suspect will take issue with part of the detail that's not correct, but not the part that's actually criminal. Here, the detective says that he pulled a gun from the back seat and threatened Erica, to which David protests, quote, "Well, I never keep a gun in my back seat." It seems like an innocent person would say, "I never pulled a gun on anyone." It's almost like the suspect wants to claim the detail is wrong but doesn't want to lie, so they deny the unimportant part that's not true. It's a really interesting bit of psychology that I love to learn more about. The point of them bringing that up was that, despite David claiming that Erica had never been in his truck, she was able to describe the details of its interior. And then there was the fact that her belongings were also in the truck, to which he said this.
You recognize crack needles?
I don't do makeup and I don't do drugs, so I don't know.
That's my point. Is it in your truck?
I don't know. I don't know what you guys want me to tell you, man. Like I did not put that in my truck. I'll tell you that.
Somebody else did, correct? Somebody walked in with it and they sat it down when they got in your truck. Somebody put it down on your floorboard. Somebody put it down when they got in there.
Wow.
He pretended like he had no idea how Erica's bag and belongings got into his truck. He also wasn't able to explain how Erica was able to perfectly describe where his house was, what his house was like on the inside, and that she had vomited outside on the sidewalk. On top of that, he couldn't explain why rounds were missing from his service weapon. Law enforcement agencies keep track of ammunition and wouldn't be given a partially full magazine. He still refused to acknowledge that he had committed any crimes. He said he went into the store at the gas station, and when he came out, the troopers were yelling at him to get down. He had no idea why, and he didn't know why he ran. He was basically just wasting the investigators' time. After hours in the interrogation room, he finally admitted that he had been with Erica, but he claimed it was all a misunderstanding. He said that they had been at his house and then they went to get food and he pulled out his gun, but it was holstered and he was just moving it. She freaked out and ran out of the truck. He said that he did not remember grabbing her shirt. That story was obviously not true, and it seemed like David was trying to explain away the witness. That's when one of the investigators let David know that they had recovered bullet casings from all of the crime scenes and they would come back as a match to his weapon. As a seasoned law enforcement agent, it's crazy to me that he didn't collect his shell casings and didn't seem to think that that would be a problem up until this point. Apparently, he had never thought about it because it was after that that he finally confessed to the 3 murders that the authorities knew about and then a 4th. He described picking up Melissa, Claudine, and Shelley, taking them out to the side of the road and executing them. Then he told them about Janelle, whose body was still lying on the side of the road. Troopers raced to the area where they found her remains exactly where he described. There was a .40 caliber shell casing on the ground near her body. David spent a lot of time blaming the VA for his current situation, saying everything was fine when they lived in San Antonio, but when they moved to Laredo and he went to the VA, things got bad. He's a murderer, and most murderers try to push responsibility away from themselves. At the same time, the VA has an unfortunate history of not being extremely helpful to veterans in the US, especially the ones who have combat experience. So nobody can say how his treatment from the VA truly affected him specifically. I can say that none of it made him start murdering women. Him going to the VA, being diagnosed with PTSD and being prescribed medication didn't make him suddenly start murdering women. And yes, psychiatric medications can affect people in a negative way and have resulted in people killing. But the cases are rare and generally involve a person having a sudden adverse reaction when withdrawing from those drugs, and that causes them to carry out one tragic event. A mass shooting, a killing spree, or a suicide. They don't cause someone to carry out murders over a long period of time where you pick up someone under false pretenses, take them out to a secluded area, and shoot them in the head. Basically, psychiatric drugs don't cause someone to suddenly become a serial killer. On top of that, he was abusing the medication, taking them with alcohol and popping them in front of people in a way that seemed like he wasn't taking them at proper intervals. So as much as he wanted to blame the VA and the medication, it wasn't the cause. Before we finish this episode, I just want to remind you that we're trying to hit 1 million subscribers this year, so before you go, take a minute to subscribe to the channel. Even better, tell someone else about the channel so they can subscribe as well. Then make sure you both turn on notifications so you always know when a new episode airs. You can also support the channel by checking out our merch at thisismonsters.com. A link is in the description. Your support is appreciated. David was charged with 1 count of capital murder for the 4 murders and 1 count of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. He pleaded not guilty. Not necessarily because he hadn't committed the murders, but as his lawyer would describe during his opening statement, because of a number of legal technicalities. The defense would question whether or not David understood his rights when he had made his confession. Remember, he refused to initial the paper. The defense also claimed that the search of David's truck after his arrest was not legal, though it was. The defense had previously filed a motion to exclude the confession, but that was denied, so the jury got to hear the entire thing. They also heard recorded jail calls between David and his wife where David expressed concern about his confession and is trying to make sure he and his wife are quote-unquote on the same page for the trial. Outside of that, the recovered bullets and casings left at the scene matched his service weapon, which was recovered from his truck. There were also tire tracks at some of the scenes that matched the tires of his truck. Then Erica Pena took the stand and told the story of her escape from David the day before he was arrested. Of course, the defense tried to make her out to be a drug addict, but she had been sober for almost a year at the time of her testimony, and her story matched evidence, such as her bag and belongings being recovered from David's vehicle. The defense didn't call a single witness. There was nothing anybody could say that would excuse David's actions. On December 7, 2022, Juan David Ortiz was found guilty on all counts. The prosecutor had chosen not to seek the death penalty before the trial began, so David was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Though David wants people to believe that his murders were intended to clean the streets and they were brought on by medications prescribed by doctors at the VA, many believe he had been cheating on his wife with sex workers for years and that he had some reason to worry that Melissa was going to expose him. He was an evil person, and the thrill of that first kill overtook him, and he needed to do it again, and again, and again. And he would have never stopped if he hadn't been caught. The irony is that, while claiming he was a savior cleaning up the city, he was actually the monster making it more dangerous. Thanks for watching This Is Monsters. New episodes are uploaded twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. There are occasional bonus episodes covering unsolved cases and criminal history. If you have a suggestion for a case you think I should cover, leave it in the comments. You can always follow the channel on Instagram at thisis_monsters and purchase merch at thisismonsters.com. Thanks so much, and be safe.